بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى أهله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, first of all, I apologize for the delay. Our live stream was having some technical difficulties. The good news though today, inshallah, we get to finish our hadith number 18. I'm so excited because we've been at this hadith for a while. But although it's taken a lot of time to get through this hadith, I can't help but appreciate that alhamdulillah, we've taken the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We've gone phrase by phrase. We tried to do justice to it, man. And I feel like the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's what they deserve. Because the tradition of this ummah is that we have always held the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in awe, in reverence. And I'll give you all a few examples where Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, they used to say about him that once he was doing his halaqah on hadith. And as he began, he said, Haddathani Khalili. My beloved friend Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam narrated to me. And he said that, and he began to tear up. And he collected himself, he got himself together, and he just tried again. He's like, Haddathani Khalili. And once again, the memories of the Prophet ﷺ came flooding back, and he couldn't actually continue that halaqah that day. And he had to end the class. These were the raw emotions. This is the emotional bond they had with the Prophet ﷺ. This mixture of awe and this mixture of love. This is such a beautiful, beautiful mixture that they had. Abdullah ibn Umar, same thing. Whenever he would remember the Prophet ﷺ and narrate hadith, he would tear up. And one of our great scholars that we have discussed here, Muhammad ibn Sirin. They used to say about Muhammad ibn Sirin that he was the type of a scholar that he would joke around with his students a lot. Like he would troll. It was like lighthearted, pinch of humor. That was his style. And he was in the habit of keeping things lighthearted. But his colleague Hassan al-Basri though, you went into Hassan al-Basri's halaqah, you gonna tear up, man. Like he'd keep you on the edge, you get chills, hair-raising moments. That was his style. But even Muhammad ibn Sirin, who was chill like that, and more on the comedic side, when the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ would come, they would say kaliha. Like he would become nervous. Like, when you have frown and your forehead begins to crunch up, he would get nervous, a little bit of anxiety, and he would kind of shrink. So he doesn't end up saying something about the Prophet ﷺ he didn't say. That's the kind of respect they had, man. Imam Malik rahimahullah, they used to say that Imam Malik, when he would do the halaqah of hadith, he would take a shower, put on his best thobe, put on his best cologne, and then he would come out and he would do hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Why? Ijlal li hadithi Rasulullah ﷺ, to show reverence and awe to Allah's Messenger's words, man. Tell you something. One of my favorite stories in this regard is that of Imam Shafi'i. I love stories, so I'm trying to share a few with you. So Imam Shafi'i once was sitting with his students, and they were discussing a fiqh issue, halal and haram. So someone asked him a question about a fiqh issue, and Imam Shafi'i says, well, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that has come to us says that the Prophet ﷺ said this on this issue. This student says, oh, so is that your opinion too? Hadith, the student of Imam Shafi who's telling us this story, he says, as if Imam Shafi was about to explode from anger. He's like, listen to what he says, because I understand the situation here, right? He's asked a question on a fiqh issue. He's like, here's the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. This is what the Prophet ﷺ has to say on this issue. And the other guy, he's like, oh, is that your opinion too? Imam Shafi says, do I look like a non-Muslim to you? Do I look like I'm wearing a cross? Do I look like I got 3 strips on my head? Who's like, of course, aqulu bihi na'am. Of course, what else would I say? This is Messenger of God speaking here. This is the attitude, man, of our scholars. The awe when it came to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Now it's sad in our day and age that kind of respect is not always given to hadith and sunnah. For oftentimes we come across people, or who we call the Quraniyuns. They're all about um, respecting the Quran. But the moment you quote hadith, they're like, thanks, but no thanks. Very dismissive, outright brushing off hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And man, like I was sharing with my students, Sheikh Yasir Qadi was telling us that once he was in a conference with one of these enlightened, forward-thinking individuals, and they were discussing an issue of halal and haram. And Sheikh Yasir Qadi, on that issue, quoted a hadith, and this person says, oh, you don't have to quote me his opinion. La ilaha illallah, man. That is like, I don't know how you show up on the Day of Judgment with that kind of a dismissive, condescending attitude towards hadith. Have you guys ever come across anything like this? Where somebody was like, outright, they're like, yeah, give me Quran. Hadith, keep it to yourself. Have you all ever encountered something like this? I wanted to ask you guys. Yes, Anas, bismillah, go ahead.
So actually a friend told me this about somebody that he knew. He knew him because when he would explain Quran, the guy that would explain Quran to him was like so loving about it and was so like deep about it. But as soon as he said, oh, well, you know, the Prophet ﷺ quoted this, he would say, where'd you hear that from? And the friend would be like, Bukhari. And he would just like brush it off his shoulders, like, what's Bukhari? Like, nothing in Bukhari is true, things like that. And like, the only thing true in Bukhari is like the characteristics that a human being should be. And all the other stuff is like, we should brush it off. And I'm just like,
sad, man. I'm telling you, man, this type of attitude goes against 1400 years of Islamic scholarship. May Allah protect us. You don't want to show up against a galaxy of scholarship and the Sahaba on one side, and you and your fringe opinions, you go on rogue opinions on one side. What face, you know, the Prophet said, don't embarrass me on the Day of Judgment. Like, I don't know if there's anything that gets more embarrassing than that. Allah protect. So that's what we have been trying to do. We have been taking the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and we've been trying to do justice to it. So today, inshallah, we get to finish hadith number 18. And if you all remember, Abu Darda radiallahu anh is bringing us this hadith and the 9 pieces of advice the Prophet ﷺ gave him. Now we're on the last 3 pieces of advice, and they're all kind of similar, and they're all related to intra-family dynamics. So I thought we would cover it all together, and inshallah, khitamuhu misk, and inshallah complete this study, or the study of this hadith. So in the last 3 pieces of advice the Prophet ﷺ gives, the Prophet ﷺ says, وَأَنْفِقْ مِنْ طَوْلِكَ عَلَىٰ أَهْلِكَ. Spend from your wealth upon your family, upon your spouse. That's the first advice. Then he says, very important, and pay attention to this one because this is an issue in our community. وَلَا تَرْفَعْ عَصَاكَ عَلَىٰ أَهْلِكَ. Don't you dare ever raise your hand against your spouse. And third, وَأَخِفْهُمْ فِي اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. And put the fear of God in their hearts. 3 things. Spend on them. Don't you raise your hand on your spouse, and put the fear of Allah in your family. These are the 3 things the Prophet ﷺ gave advice upon. Now, if you take a step back real quick, and you appreciate a beautiful connection here. When the Prophet ﷺ says, spend on them, in other words, the Prophet ﷺ is saying, take care of their financial needs. Then he says, don't you raise your hand on your spouse or your family. In other words, take care of their emotional needs. What could be more emotionally jarring than you being abusive to your family? Make sure emotionally you're there as you're there financially. And then finally he says, make sure God is center in their lives. In other words, take care of their spiritual needs. Financial, emotional, physical. Financial, emotional, and spiritual needs. These are the 3 things the Prophet ﷺ is kind of ending this advice with. So let's start with financial real quick. You guys, something beautiful, beautiful about our deen is that in our deen, when you spend money on your family, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala counts it as charity in your book of deeds. It's insane. Like there's a hadith in Bukhari where Abu Mas'ud says that the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا أَنْفَقَ الرَّجُلُ عَلَىٰ أَهْلِهِ نَفَقَةً يَحْتَسِبُهَا فَهُوَ لَهُ صَدَقَةٌ. When a man spends on his family, hoping for the reward from Allah, Allah writes it as charity. Isn't that beautiful, dude? Like, you can go to Al Yusuf and bring a big shawarma plate for your wife, and that actually counts as good deeds. That's actually charity, man. Like I wanna, go to Mimosa a little more often and get a few pancakes. Just bring it to your family. It becomes charity, man. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept. And like our deen has gone above and beyond to make sure that you are putting, like when you're spending money on your family, you have no guilty conscience. So Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, one of our famous companions, in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, something interesting happened to him in that he got what they can call a heart attack. He fell seriously ill and he thought he's going to die. And he's like rich, mashallah, like loaded. So he's like, what do I do with all this wealth? Because he only had one daughter as his heir and he has no other inheritors. So he's like, all this money, like sure, I'm going to give some to my daughter, but like, what do I do with all this money? So he's like, Ya Rasulullah, should I just give all my wealth in charity? I'll leave a little bit for my daughter, but I'll give like 90% of it in charity. The Prophet ﷺ said, no. You leaving your heirs rich and well off is better for you than you leave them potentially on the verge of bankruptcy and begging. So he's like, Ya Rasulullah, okay, fine, I'll leave half for her, half in charity. The Prophet said, no. He's like, okay, how about 1/3? 1/3 in charity, 2/3 for her. The Prophet said, fine, and even that's too much. Isn't that beautiful, man? Like, take care of your family, man. Like, spend on them. Obviously, we're not saying spoil them now, get them Yeezys and like Supreme hoodies or whatever. Yeah, but like, at the same time, when you're like in the aisle of the grocery store, you don't have to give them a hard time for a $4 cereal box. So, that balance is important. So the Prophet ﷺ wanted to make sure families were taken care of. And now look, y'all, I'm gonna get a little bit more detailed here. Is that in our deen, when it comes to our deen particularly, we want to make sure that we understand, particularly as men, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes the men responsible for the financial upkeep and the financial responsibility of the family. Like, you as a man, it is obligatory upon you to support your wife and your kids. That is on you. Now, if your wife kind of steps up and she kind of pitches in, that's beautiful. But she's not legally obliged to do that. And that is something you and I have to understand. What's the wisdom in this? SubhanAllah, the wisdom of Sharia is unreal. Think about this. When a man goes outside and works, and he has a career, and he's like out winning bread for his family, that gives him a sense of identity. That gives him a sense of purpose. That gives him a sense of meaning and fulfillment. So it's really important for him to go out and he has to be out and about doing that for his own sanity. And secondly, when a man is outside of the house, it gives a healthy distance between the two spouses so they don't go crazy. Like what's happening in Corona times. I don't know if you all know, but like divorce rates in New York are up. Why? Because everybody's in each other's face. It's insane. So that healthy time apart, you know how they say distance makes the hearts grow fonder? Yeah, when you leave the house and you're at work, that distance is healthy. That space is healthy. And your wife kind of needs that. You kind of need that. And like there's an Urdu meme flying around right now where somebody's like, having your husband at the house full time, all the time, is no less of a headache than having your mother-in-law full time in the house. Because your husbands get naggy, like, picking on every little thing, not letting the wife focus. So that's that distance, that space is healthy. And then finally, and I'm going to be choosing my words really carefully so I don't get hate mail. Our deen encourages that man and a woman specialize in their respective duties. What I mean by this is Islam encourages, not demands and force, encourages that a man specializes in economic affairs and a woman specializes in domestic affairs. Not because there's inherent value in one over the other, or like, one has more superiority over the other. No. Because when one person is asked to do both, they can get crushed, man. And subhanAllah, I've seen this with in my own close circle of friends where, for example, somebody, particularly our sisters, they have to suffer this a lot where they got like career responsibilities and expectations and they got to keep up there. And then they got a family and they're spread thin on all directions and they're stressed out and not fulfilled. So specializing can keep tension. And like, it's kind of like they say load management. That's basically what it is. It's just load management of responsibilities. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, if I can take a step back, remember he said, spend on your family, financial needs. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, make sure you take care of the emotional needs of your family. How? Don't raise your hand on them. And you guys, I just want to make sure, not to go on a rant, but I don't know if y'all know, domestic abuse is a thing, including in our community, where men particularly are, they raise their hands, they get violent, they get physical with their spouses. And the worst part is they justify that in the name of religion. This hadith is an evidence against you and a witness against you on the day of judgment, in the court of God, where the Prophet says, La tarfa, do not raise your hand. And how dare you justify that in the name of religion? The Prophet says, hadith comes in Bukhari, that he was telling some of his companions, like, how dare one of you abuse physically your wife and then you sleep next to her in the night? Like, what's wrong with you? How do you think like that? And Aisha radiallahu anha says, hadith comes in Muslim, she says the Prophet never, ever raised his hand against his wife, against his servants, against people who were serving around the household. The only time he raised his hand when he was fighting fi sabilillah. That was not the personality. This is not the character of this ummah to do that. Islam never would permit anyone to physically harm another person except in very limited, well-defined, restricted circumstances, which are beyond the scope of our discussion today. But man, you want to be real careful that this is something that this is not a trend in your family. This is not something you do. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect, man. So I was listening to somebody who, I've shared this before, so I'm not going to get into the full details, where one lady made a comment. She's like, she was commenting on somebody who got beat up in her family by her husband. She's like, yeah, we've all done our time. We've all been beaten. Sorry, we have to all fulfill our quota. The way she so casually said it tells you just how rampant, unfortunately, in some cultures and zip codes and like ethnicities, this can be so widespread. Allah protect, man. This is not the akhlaq of our deen. And I want this part to be very, very clear. And last but not least, y'all, and this is where I'm going to ask you guys to kind of share, and that is take care of the spiritual needs of your family. That is, put the fear of God in their heart. Now, you guys will be like, why not love of God? Yeah, love of God is obviously understood. Allah has done so much for you. You loving God is not the big deal. The big deal is, does God love you? And that should create a sense of like, am I disappointing Allah? Am I invoking His anger? And fear can oftentimes be a safer emotion than love. The Prophet has talked about Allah's love in different hadith. In this one, he's focusing on fear because oftentimes fear is what keeps you going in the negative. Love is what pushes you and pluses you, helps you go the extra mile. Fear keeps you from sinking, keeps you floating, and then love makes you fly. So you understand the different functions of different emotions. The Prophet ﷺ is like, you have to put the fear of God in their heart. How do you do that? Parents. How do we do that as heads of households? You do that by preaching? Teaching? Is it like keep mouthing things off? Oh, no. You don't do that by preaching. You do that by modeling. You don't do that by mouthing off. You do that by exemplifying. And this is something we have to understand. How you won't preach about fear of God when your character is anything but the fear of God? How you gonna tell your kids to pray on time when you miss your Asr watching Tiger King? How's that gonna happen? How are you gonna tell your kids to be upright in school and your business is the embodiment of shadiness? Scamming customers, selling haram, and you're telling your kids, Berta, I speak the truth. You are a walking evidence, proof for what you say or against what you say. And this is something that, man, modeling is so powerful. that your child subconsciously and consciously is absorbing what you do, how you live. I'm gonna tell you all a quick example of this that always gets me, man. They were doing a study on domestic abusers. I think they studied like 60, 70 men. And they were studying to see if there's something common in their background, that can help us understand why these people become the way they do. And after studying these 60, 70 men, you know what they discovered? They said in almost every single one of them had seen their father beat their mothers. Almost every single one of them. They had seen their mother getting beaten up at the hands of their fathers. Now I'm asking y'all, when they saw their mother getting beaten up, whose side are they on? Their mother. In their eyes, mother is the victim, father is the oppressor. Yet when they themselves become husbands, they subconsciously revert to the only way they know how to be a husband, and that is through their fathers. La ilaha illallah. This is the kind of enormous influence you have on your kids. Don't waste that power. Don't waste that privilege. And you don't want to be tied to a generation of losers on the day of judgment because you didn't do your job of parenting. Have you guys seen, I want to ask y'all, this gap you often see in, preaching versus the practice? Where people preach one thing, but they often don't live it. Don't say any specific names, of course, particularly if these are family members, but what have you seen in this gap that we often come across, where people are like, mashallah, pounding the pulpit, but no action? Yeah. Feel free to unmute yourself and comment. Yes, Abiyaz, go ahead.
By the way, I've seen families, if you hear that, they tell their kids not to curse or say bad words or lie or watch, like, for example, haram stuff or music or whatever. Like, they'll tell them not to watch American songs and stuff and movies.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they're watching like Bollywood at their house. So like,
And Bollywood doesn't. This is my humble opinion, man. Bollywood is like way worse at times than Hollywood, man. They don't even have a rating system. It's so open, and astaghfirullah, man. It's really disgusting. And families are watching this. I mean, it wasn't long ago when the Super Bowl halftime show was like being consumed by millions in family living rooms, man. And nobody's guarding the TV. Nobody's flipping the channel. And now you're going to talk about haya? Really? What face? What credibility do you have left? So that's something we have to be careful of. Any other thoughts or experiences y'all have had?
I have one.
Yeah.
So like, I have a friend who has an older cousin. His cousin's like over 20 years older than him, and like, his cousin disrespected my friend's dad, and my friend disrespected his cousin. He's like, oh, you should respect me, and he's like, you just disrespected my dad. Like, why would you? How do you expect me to respect you after you just disrespected your elder? It just doesn't make sense.
Facts, dude. Facts.
So I don't have too many experiences with this, but I have a question that probably a lot of people have. Is so let's say somebody has a father, an uncle, a grandpa, or somebody who, for example, is mean like that, but at the end of the day tells you to pray 5 times a day. How do you tell them without being like mean? Because obviously we're still supposed to respect our elders. How do you come across them by telling them like, your actions are not showing me what I need to learn,
Yeah, man, that's a tough position to be in. Understand one thing is that our deen is obedience to Allah and then to everybody else. So if your parents are commanding you to do something good, even though they're not doing it themselves, that's not an excuse for you not to do it. Hopefully that's clear. Because in our deen, the principle is simple. You obey the creation so long as what they're telling you does not contradict what the Creator is saying. So if they're telling you to pray, they're kind of reinforcing what Allah is saying anyways. So your intention is to obey God and please God. And that's not necessarily like pleasing your parents in that regard, because you're praying for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, what if your dad is like, hey, go work at the gas station, and like it's a liquor store? Now we have a problem, because he's asking you to do haram. He owns the haram, finances the haram, and he's forcing you in that situation. Now Allah says, فَلَا تُطِعُهُمَا, do not obey them in something. No, as the Prophet ﷺ also teaches us, لَا إِطَاعَةَ فِي الْخَلْقِ فِي مَعْصِيَةِ اللَّهِ. You do not obey the creation at the expense of the Creator. At that moment, you're going to have a conversation. But Allah, even in this situation, says, be kind to them. Be gentle with them. If they ask you to do shirk, forget working at a liquor store. You still have to be kind to them. You don't listen to them in that particular qualified situation. You have to be kind. So in that situation, if your parents are asking you to be religious, yeah, you're going to cringe. Absolutely. You're going to cringe. You'll be like, you know what a double face. Like in your mind, shaitan is going to put all sorts of things. Your job is to remember, I'm obeying Allah. I'm doing this for God. Though it seems overtly, I'm listening to my parents. But your intention is always for Allah, and you're pleasing Him, and your loyalty is to Him, and you do your best to be the best role model, and you try to, when the opportunity is right, try to be a source of guidance for your parents. You know, preaching usually never works. It's always being the best person you can be. And hopefully their heart melts and they start becoming more inspired by, like, man, if that's what real religiosity looks like, my son who's a coolness to my eyes, maybe I want a little some of that in my life. That would be, I think, the safest way to kind of move forward. Any other thoughts and contributions before we wrap up for the night?
I have one.
Yes, please.
So this incorporates what we were talking about in the beginning. So I'm not gonna say who, of course, but I was at a friend's house, and then him and his mom was like, they were like having a feud. They were like yelling at each other, and then I was just there, so I can't really avoid it. So the mom was like yelling to her son, and then she was saying, "Oh, how are you yelling at me, treating me this way? But you tell your dad not to whenever he yells at me."
Wait, what was the last part she said? You tell your dad?
So whenever your dad yells at me or abuses me, you tell him not to, and
I see.
I
see. That makes sense. That's crazy, man. That is crazy, subhanAllah. This is not exactly your situation, but oftentimes fathers are telling their sons, they're like, oh, respect others. When those same fathers are disrespecting their mothers, that son's mother, their wives, they're like, yo, how's your son's gonna respect anybody? Is he gonna respect his wife when he grows up? It's such a vicious cycle at times. May Allah protect. Khair, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be of those who are there for our families, spiritually, financially, emotionally. Be the best people. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I'll end on this, he used to say, be amazing to your family. Why? Because I'm the best to my family. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we treat our families that way. So you guys, barakallah feek for your contributions. Subhanallah wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant.